today's question is about a theme, you know, the famous idea, one of the things most associated with the Romans, the idea of Panem circenses, bread and circuses, that all the emperor needs to do is feed the poor and entertain them with spectacular and gruesome games, and they're happy, they won't riot, and therefore he can politically do whatever he likes, execute whoever he likes, nobody cares. You know, it's the sort of the movies like Gladiator, that's what Commodus is presented as doing, as just, I know what the people want, I'll just give them entertainment, and I'll give them death, and they'll love me for it. Or I think it's Derek Jacobi says the line along that line, or something like that. We've had the Those About to Die Amazon series recently, which is very much this idea of let's just keep everybody entertained and it'll be fine. And very clearly the Romans do spend a lot of money on entertainment. So let's look, and the question is, were such policies as superficial as some make out? You know, I mean, not at all unlike today's government administration, provide subsidies, tax breaks, welfare to the lower class, economically disadvantaged. Admittedly, in some cases, might be pork barrelling to a greater or lesser extent. Well, there's obviously a lot within the question, and we can't go into everything. But if you just look at the remains of Rome itself today, I mean, the Circus Maximus has been so quarried out, basically, that it's not as impressive as it was. But this is an arena for chariot racing that could seat maybe 250,000 people. The Colosseum, 50,000, 55,000, something like that. Theatres that could seat 15,000. And these are at Rome, and they're the biggest, but you will see very large amphitheatres, circuses elsewhere throughout the empire. Even in the Greek world, where they don't build amphitheatres, gladiatorial games become very, very popular, and they enjoy the violence of that entertainment. And all of this costs money. This is incredibly expensive. So it means that not only are you building the venues for this thing, but gladiators, by their very nature, are expensive, because quite a lot of them, you train them and they get killed. Beast fights, you're bringing all these exotic animals in and killing them. Chariot races, again, the horses are going to get injured, the men are going to get injured, the chariot's going to crash, you know, not quite as spectacularly and as the Hollywood version tends to be, where hardly anybody ever finishes a race under any circumstances. But nevertheless, this is very expensive stuff, and it is a huge production. So much underlies this, the training, the preparation of men, of animals, chariot teams, the training of charioteers, and the spectacle of it all, the sort of sets they're using, and the gilded armour, the decoration, as well as these venues were meant to be spectacular. They weren't just the equivalent of sort of concrete and grim. They were meant to be beautiful. You know, the Colosseum was decorated heavily with marble. Many other venues like this were. You had the coloured awnings, you had perfume being sprayed on the crowd, you had orchestras playing music, and you get them. There are amphitheatres outside every legionary fortress. There are, most in, the towns in Britain have them. Quite small communities will try and get together. You could put up temporary structures to just basically for the crowd to sit to stages, but a lot of places like they're purpose built. It's a status symbol for local authorities, local magistrates, local councils. Laws have to be passed in some from Asia Minor, for instance, regulating and restricting the amount that could be spent on gladiatorial games, because different communities were trying to outdo each other by spending all this cash and running themselves up into debt simply to show off and be the prestigious city that had these games and had so many fights or so many races or whatever it might be. Gladiators become, the famous ones, very expensive commodities, and you always had to sort of pay an insurance or put a deposit down on them when you hired them, in that if you didn't return them in a fit state, if they they'd lost any bits, let alone they'd lost their lives, then you wouldn't get all your money back. Because again, there's a celebrity element to this, and that's something that Hollywood and I suppose the Amazon thing recently, Gladiator 2, gets right as well. This is showbiz. This is entertainment. This is all about spectacle, all about just how grand, how amazing this could be. And these things would have been incredible to see. However grim and appalling what was going on might be, nevertheless, you know, you can't deny the fact that they're spending a lot on this. This is incredibly lavish entertainment. And it is just entertainment. That's one thing to emphasize. It tells you something about a society and an economy when it has enough money that it can effectively waste money on just making life more pleasant. And the Romans do this with things like bathhouses. You know, they're remarkably sophisticated pieces of engineering, and yet all they do is make your life nicer. You know, you can go and wash, you can go and feel clean, you can feel civilized, but they're not producing food or anything like that. Gladiatorial games, chariot races, even more sort of ephemeral. They produce nothing other than a thrill and excitement and entertainment, make you excited. They create jobs in one respect, in that a lot of people are involved in this industry, just like the film industry today, that culminates in what you see on screen, but all the stages you've had to get to that point. You know, even to the extent of the people who've built the cinema where you're sitting and developed the technology of the projector and all this sort of thing. So there are jobs around it, but nevertheless not enough to justify its existence on its own. This is not really a profit-making enterprise. This is something where you lavish money to show that you are lavishing money on the wider population. With the bread aspect of it, with the grain dole, this is something that in Rome begins in the late 2nd century BC and then becomes a political football with various radical tribunes in the 1st century BC, finally regulated under Augustus, where it's one of those things. Rome essentially has grown to be a city that cannot feed itself from the surrounding area. By the late 1st century BC, the population is probably at least 1 million. That's huge by ancient standards. No other city in the empire will ever come as close to that. Alexandria, Antioch are the next biggest ones, but they're several 100,000 population. They don't really get anywhere near the 1 million mark. That's a lot of people. They need to consume a lot of food. It creates all sorts of other problems. It's, you know, one of the reasons why Rome has this developed sewer system and water supply system is that you're dealing with all this waste. You need all this water in there as well. So this is something that becomes, if you don't provide grain, then the fear in the Republic is that another politician will do this, will win the support of enough people that they will riot on his behalf, let alone, and certainly vote on his behalf, so that it will imbalance the political system. Somebody else, one of your rivals, will be doing far better than you politically. So it is a way of gaining favour. It's meant from the beginning. It's a gift to the people. And in that respect, you know, people today, they don't like paying tax and they tend to like the government giving them things. And if it seems to be free, even if you've in fact been paying for it in some other way, they like it. And then if that's taken away, even if it was something you didn't have to pay for before, people tend to resent that. Rome isn't the first to do this sort of thing. You think back to democratic Athens and its height in the 5th century, and even before that, the city has grown much larger than most Greek cities, and because of that, it requires, particularly as Attica's, it's not the most fertile land in Greece. It's not as there's not as much rich land there as, say, in the Peloponnese. From early on, the Athenians have shown considerable interest in the area up by the Dardanelles, Gallipoli Peninsula, and then beyond that to the Black Sea. And they are importing large quantities of wheat, barley, basic staple foods from this area, and that will continue through. And it's behind the Periclean strategy and the Peloponnesian War that you can basically abandon your own fields, stay behind your walls, and watch as the Spartans just march up and down outside because you're eating food that's been brought in from elsewhere. Rome's developed in a similar way, and of course, when you have a city where not everybody is busy producing food to eat, then you start to get all the other things: the craftsmanship, the art, the inventions, the production of other objects. So there's a lot going on. So it's one of those things where it happens to an extent in every city, but the larger a city gets, the more of an issue this becomes, where entertainment and food supply is state subsidized. There has always been a big problem in Rome, where you've had this balance of, you've moved from an essentially agrarian society to one that's more complicated than that, where not everybody owns their own plot of land or works on the farm and hires out their labour to other farmers and grows a lot of what they eat. Again, it's a sign of how developed this society has become, that quite a lot of people have become removed from the actual production of food. It's still the main activity. More people make food in the ancient world than do anything else, but societies like the Roman Empire at its height have far more people who specialize in doing something else as well. It's still they're not the majority of the population, but they are a very significant minority. It gets larger and larger. And so it's part of the organization, it's part of keeping the city stable. You need a lot of these people there. One feature, I mean, it's the striking thing when you go to Rome today, is you obviously see these big monuments. You know, you'll see something like the Baths of Caracalla and marvel at just how huge they are. The Colosseum, the same. I do remember seeing some tourists asking for directions to the Colosseum by the Arch of Constantine, which, you know, if you'll know, is right next to the thing. And clearly you sort of felt they were expecting something even larger than the Colosseum actually is. But it's big, it's impressive. Roman monuments like that, or you go in the Pantheon and you stand underneath that dome ceiling, and it is staggering to think that this thing is best part of 2,000 years old. And it's still, you know, how many modern structures are as impressive as that? So that you're not just, you know, bread and circuses is part of this general amenities if you live in a big city. Bathhouses being the other example, we've talked about them before, but that you build something like the Baths of Caracalla, and it's not the first big thermae and won't be the last, that are open to everybody. Not necessarily all the time, but enough, you know, you get your opportunity to get there. It's one of the things, because everything has to be in walking distance, because this is before, you know, any form of transport other than that. Ancient cities, they tend to grow upwards with the insulae, like the blocks of flats in Rome, and they have all these amenities that are readily accessible. But you will see similar things, Pompeii, Herculaneum, you will see them in city after city, town after town throughout the Roman Empire. So the same issues are reflected everywhere. Now there are two aspects of that. One of the things is that brings people to the city and means if they've drifted there, if they haven't, you know, they've no longer got farms, they can't support themselves that way, or whatever it might be, there's things for them to do. It's a nice place to be. You have lots of opportunities. Providing them with an issue of corn at a fixed rate, or more often, depending on who you are, free, that prevents the feast and famine element, where as harvest changed, as people store food to manipulate the market, things can become unpredictable, volatile, people start to starve, because obviously they are in a sense artificial creations. You concentrate 1 million people, or even 50,000, 100,000 or more in smaller cities in one place, then they are eating a lot of food, they're requiring a lot of food that cannot be supplied locally, so it needs to be brought in over a distance, hence the big organisation of the grain fleet. Sicily is the first overseas Roman province, and it has a lot to do with its grain production. It's one of the reasons that Rome can grow as a city bigger, because you're no longer relying on just the local agriculture to support everybody. Egypt becomes critical in this. North Africa will as well. Lots of food is coming in by trade, so the bread and circuses is part of it. The imperial element, the government element, where you're being given things just to support you and keep you happy, that's part of it. But plenty of people are also buying their own food. And of course the other advantage of a big city like this is it's a huge market for every sort of good from the empire and the wider world. So it's why you have these bigger warehouses full of pepper and things like that. You get the silks, the things that have been exotic, rare, incredibly expensive just for the rich in the 1st century BC become relatively commonplace, and far more people can have access to them, at least to some extent, by the later 1st century into the 2nd and beyond. But if you think again, these things that stand out to us as what we think of as an ancient city, these big monuments, these big buildings, including the Colosseum, including the Circus Maximus, including the Baths, one of the other aspects, it's not as simple as just everybody comes to the city and then the emperor or the government gives them things to keep them happy, because otherwise they'll riot. And that means they're stable, but it means they have no interest in politics beyond what the leaders will give them. One of the other reasons there are all these big monuments is not just to show people you're in a great city and we're the head of the empire and there are all these nice things for you to do. There are these entertainments you can go to the bathhouse, you have access, you can see food from all over the place, goods from the wider world. It's also these big projects provide labour and jobs. So, it was in the those about to die. They had the idea the Colosseum's being built by Jewish slaves, and something that's not the way it worked. What you do is, as an emperor, you keep on having these big building projects. It gives work to people. So in a sense, there is a modern aspect to that too, and it's it's a bit like the New Deal or the National Socialists and the Autobahn, putting people to work, build things, give them a wage, which means you don't have to give them out free food or free money to support themselves. They're actually earning something and can buy it, which is then generally good for the wider economy. That money circulates, and that's a lot of the aspect of the games, is that whilst it may not directly support people in terms of the infrastructure to make it possible to display it, the big buildings, the big monuments, actually these provide an awful lot of work for a period. And you could say the same. It's no coincidence that the Great Temple in Jerusalem nears completion of building a couple of years before the rebellion. You've probably got a lot of unemployed workers in those last couple of years who are looking for something to do, or just restless, or are getting desperate. There were some aspects, there were some resources that hadn't quite been used, so it hadn't quite been finished, but the bulk of the work had been done. Many of these projects take a very, very long time, or if you're in Rome, then the emperor will decide, well, okay, we've finished that, let's build something else. There's a story about Vespasian being presented with some sort of engineering device, perhaps a crane or something like that, that saved manpower, and paying the inventor, but then quietly getting rid of the design because he didn't want to do people out of their jobs. So it's more simple than just bread and circuses and just being given freebies. You're in the cities there's a specialised labour force, and there are the skilled craftsmen, but there's lots of jobs that can be picked up by anybody when one of these big projects comes on. So when Julius Caesar starts lavishing money to build his forum from the spoils of the Gallic War, he's giving money out to other senators to help them, get them to buy up land, to smooth through the legal aspects of it, but also he'll be employing a vast number of people, and there will be the big firms, the big contractors, as well as the individuals who end up getting a job. So ancient cities, there's a school of thought that sees them as essentially parasitic on the wider empire and the population, but they generate activity and work within them, and the games are part of this, because the games require, or at least are best performed in these grand arenas. And it's, you build a temple, you build a bathhouse, you build one of these things, you improve the road system, you build an aqueduct, a bridge. You do it all with one eye on its practical element and another on, okay, this is a good job creation scheme as well. This will keep people employed in funds, and that money is going to be spread around because they will buy things with it. So it's far more than that. There is some truth to it. It's not entirely cynical. And there are aspects, obviously, that would be similar to modern governments if they think things through. It's perhaps a little bit harder today to invest large money in an infrastructure project that actually creates a lot of jobs, and creates a lot of jobs from the community that doesn't have jobs in the first place, because they don't necessarily have the skills or the ability to move to where they are, where it's required. And there may well have been the equivalent of itinerant labourers who would go from one city to another looking for work, in the same way that, gangs of Irish, gangs of Chinese would build half the things around the world, the railroads and other railways and canals and projects in the British Empire, beyond, in South America, North America, all of these sorts of things. Although it's hard to see any direct evidence for that. But there is this naive belief that, any big project like that, it's built by slaves or it's built by captives. In the Roman Empire, for much of the Greek period as well, that's just not the case. There would be some slave labour, particularly often specialists, and in some cases there might be some cheap labour as well. But actually, this is a way of giving work, and it's not a permanent thing. And that obviously the project would be finished, and then you would wait for something else to come along. But it keeps people ticking over, so it's part of a wider system, is I think what I'm trying to say. And so yes, bread and circuses, yes, it's real, yes, it's about keeping people happy, but they continue doing this even when Rome ceases to be of any real political importance by the 4th century, where emperors hardly ever visit. Nevertheless, there are still big building projects there, because while the population has shrunk, you're still providing employment. So local magistrates and officials will be doing much the same thing, because it's partly the way things work. And as with a lot of political office, it's expected to cost you money. the rich monopolise these jobs because they're the ones that will actually spend, when they are city councillor or magistrate or whatever it was, to stage games, to stage an entertainment, to build something, to repair something. And again, you can go back to Pliny's letters when he's sent out to Bithynia in the early 2nd century, and he's to go through the accounts of Greek cities that have been competing with each other to build new projects, gymnasia, theatres, canals, basilicas, this sort of thing. And many of them have not been completed, or they've been built badly. Some of them have subsided. There's a theatre that's collapsed, because everybody's rushing out to show off. You're showing off how important you are, how wealthy you are, how generous you are to the community, but you're also creating jobs. And it's how the system works. So bread and circus is true, but it's a bit more complicated than the simple idea of just, keeping everybody happy so that you can do whatever you like politically, and just keeping them amused and bribing them effectively. So there we are. Thanks for listening.